Finance Committee to order. First thing I wanted to do is, I haven't done this before, but I want to ask for a moment of silence for what happened in Florida today. 17 people, 17 kids killed. I don't know when our leaders are going to get off their bum. I'll use a nicer word than our congressman, and do something. Thank you. Okay, first of all, everybody, I've sent them all out. Everybody should have the Finance Committee handbook, the new, excuse me, handbook that was done this fall. You just had to go on. I think I emailed actually the copy of it. So did anybody not get the handbook? Okay, and I gave to our two new people the letter, so you just basically go on that and you can download it. You can't email it, but you can download it. Okay. Like to, for those people who weren't here on Monday, Christina, our new person representing Precinct 4, and David, our person representing Precinct 20, joined us, and we appreciate their interest in all. Why don't we just quickly go around so you can start figuring out who all these people are. Al Tosti, Chair.
Alan Jones, Precinct 14.
Christina Hansberry, Precinct 4. Mary Margaret Franklin, Precinct 5.
Daryl Harmer, Precinct 12.
John Wallach, 7.
Dave Levy, live in 18, representing 20.
Dave McKenna, Precinct 21.
Pete Howard, Precinct 10.
Thomas Cacavao, 11.
Adam Chapdelaine, I'm the town manager.
And Sandy Fuller, Deputy Town Manager.
Okay, so there'll be he's here.
Paul Bayer, Precinct 13.
And Austin, Texas.
It works. Okay, well, so gradually there'll be a test on this in the next couple days, so to get everybody down. Okay, the minutes. Peter sent out the minutes electronically. I made a couple of corrections to have Paul listed as attending. Changed fear to estimated, and corrected the reserve fund. So is there any other corrections?
The reserve fund had a couple of transfers before our meeting started.
So the amount should be 1,492,230.17. So Park, we're now legal. Are there any other corrections to the minutes? All those in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, as corrected, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are done. Town manager goes through the 5-year plan. David, you're probably a little familiar with this. Christina, it's presented in the back of the Finance Committee reports. This is sort of the heart and soul of our financial plan. So with that, I will turn it over to whichever one of you would like to go through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give a very brief introduction and a little bit of background for everybody's benefit, and especially for the new members, and then let Sandy walk through the details of the plan. So, brief history, before my time and before some of our times, Arlington first put together this style of a long-range plan back in 2005, looking for an operating override that would be planned to last for more than 1 year. In that iteration, it was planned to last for 5 years. So for 2005, the town was successful at that point in putting forth this long-range plan, then called the 5-year plan, and successfully won a $6 million operating override. That lasted through fiscal year 2011. That last fiscal year, it sort of covered the budget about halfway what it needed to cover, and there were some pretty significant reductions that were needed to be made in FY11. That then prompted the creation of a new long-range plan that would have started in FY12. That was meant to be a 3-year plan, and that was proposed as a $6.49 million override, again to go in effect in FY12. That successfully passed. The voters approved that for FY12, and was supposed to last for FY12, 13, and 14. Based on a series of good things happening, better new growth than projected, slightly better state aid than projected, and most dramatically and most importantly, being able to move into the state's group insurance commission, the state's health care plan, saved the town a tremendous amount of money that stretched that plan beyond FY12, 13, 14, all the way into what Sandy's going to present tonight. But this is, as the chairman mentioned, this is the core financial planning document we use to both govern how we build our annual budgets, but also how we look at the long-range financial outlook of the town. We conservatively project revenues. We like to err on the side of collecting more than we project as opposed to the opposite. And then we put very strict expenditure constraints where we're able to constrain budgets. And it's through that combination of revenue expenditure and revenue projection and then expenditure restriction that we stay on the plan as best possible, and if we do things right, hopefully extend it further than what we projected. So there's a lot of detail that goes into it, but that's sort of the broad brush of what's happened here the better part of the past decade.
Just like when that second FY12 override was passed, that you mentioned. I mean, not living here at the time, was it minuted or discussed in town meeting or anything that look, we're probably gonna have to come back in 2 to 3 years' time to do another override? Was that kind of the expectation when it passed?
Yeah, I mean, so the administration doesn't get involved in the campaign, but I can tell you the campaign was very clear. This will last for 3 years.
Yeah.
We can't promise you anything before that. And I think that many involved citizens have this understanding that based on the town having a structural deficit, 5.5 square miles, entirely built out, limited new growth, a lot of costs that grow faster than what the combination of new growth and Proposition 2.5 can raise, that to support services in the manner in which Arlington over the past probably 20 years has liked to see services, operating overrides in some frequency or some interval are necessary. So that's a long answer of saying yes.
Yeah.
I think if the manager's formal budget is not out yet, when do you anticipate that will come out? The one that's the pretty
financial
one.
plan. We'll have that out once GIC sets its rates on March 1st. We'll probably take another few weeks and have it out by late March, early April.
Okay, so if you go online and look at last year's, it has a lot of comparative spending information that's really enlightening, and won't change much for this year.
So, any other questions on the sort of the background and the framework?
Okay.
So then I'll turn it over to Sandy.
So you have 2 pieces of paper, a big one and a little one. The long-term financial plan is on the big one. On the front there are numbers, and on the back there are words. The words explain what the numbers mean, but I'm actually also going to explain what the numbers mean. But you can either go back later and see if I was right, or try to catch me with a mistake as I go along. So we'll see. I'm going to talk first about revenue assumptions, and then our spending assumptions, and then what that means for bottom line. So with revenue, the first thing we look at is state aid. And for that, I'm going to refer to this sheet, the smaller sheet. What this has on the side that does not have the graphs is a breakdown of what's known as our cherry sheets. Cherry sheets are the words that are used to describe the information we get or the notification we get from the state about state aid. They're called cherry sheets because years ago they used to be on kind of pinkish paper. Now they're electronic, so they're white. For Arlington and for most communities in the state, there are really 2 big sources of state aid. The first is called Chapter 70, which is our general education aid, and you can see that at the top line. And just going across the top line, the first column to the far left is what we got for the current fiscal year that was voted by the legislature last year and was set in stone when they finished their budget process. It was 11.1 or $11.2 million. Then we have the governor's proposal, which came out at the end of January. And then the next line over shows what the difference is between what the cherry sheet number for the current year FY18 is and what's in the governor's budget. So there's an increase of $353,000 or 3.16% for Chapter 78. The next line is important because it shows the difference between the long-range plan, the version that we put out back in the fall when we long-range planning committee met and set out budget guidelines for the town departments and the school department, and before we knew what the governor was going to allocate. And so it shows that between last fall and in January, Chapter 70 money went up by $241,000, more than we'd expected. The reason that went up is because we received something called foundation aid. There's basically two ways that you can get state aid. One is if the state needs to put in more money in order to get you to what is known as the foundation budget. In other words, what the state's contribution to Arlington students' education is versus what's expected from the town. If there's a gap between those two, and the state in Arlington is already putting in enough so that there's a gap caused by lack of state aid, that's called foundation aid, and you can grow from time to time as the difference between what we're expected to put in and what our costs are. So some years Arlington has gotten foundation aid. We haven't for the last 2 or 3 years, just because what the state expects us to put in has grown faster than what the total cost of educating children has been here. But I'll go back to that in 1 second. The second way that you get state aid is minimum aid. And in the governor's budget this year, he put $20 per student. So for every student in whatever school district, they got an additional $20 in state aid. That's a position that Arlington has been in for the previous 3 years. The reason that we got foundation aid this year, and foundation aid generally is worth a lot more than minimum aid, is because the total costs of educating students as calculated by the state in Arlington went up faster than the required contribution we had to put in. And that has to do with 2 things, I think. One, the state changed some of its formulas, and in the governor's budget they gave more credit to how much it costs to provide health insurance in cities and towns, so that boosted up the foundation budget. And the other thing is we've seen, as you all know, tremendous increases in enrollment, and that has added to the total foundation costs. So we got a bump. It wasn't really expected. We didn't know when we were doing the forecast that the governor would put in that extra allowance for health insurance, but it's a welcome thing. There are other lines on this sheet. I won't go through all of them. I'll just say that the other major increase is in unrestricted general government aid, also known as UGA. I don't make up the names. As you can see, the difference between last year and this year is an increase of $265,000, which is a 3.5% increase. That is equal to the increase that the state is estimating it's going to receive in its overall revenues for going into FY19. And it fulfills a promise that Governor Baker has kept for the last couple of years, that whatever increase the state sees in its overall revenue, the governor will pass on in local aid, in UGA aid, to the cities and towns. Overall, if you factor in all these other things, and I'm happy to answer questions about the specifics, but given the time, I won't go through every single line. We have a 3.12% increase in state aid from the previous year, and which is about almost $500,000. That is net of assessments, which are on the bottom part of this page. So the state giveth and the state taketh away. So it gives us state aid, but it also takes back money from us in the form of things like the MBTA assessments and charter school or choice assessments. So when you net all the comings and goings, we're up about $500,000 in state aid. So that's the first line on the long-range plan. Just ask if there are any questions about that again. If the
The veterans benefits dropped substantially. Why is that?
It's funny that you should ask that. 'Cause I just gave a presentation today. Adam and I were at the State Veteran Service Officers Association meeting, and we were talking about state aid and veteran services. It's really because there's always a one-year lag in the state reimbursing us. They reimburse us generally 75% of what we spend, and although for a few things, like aid for certain homeless veterans, we get 100%. So in FY15, we saw a big bump up in aid. Then in our spending, and then in FY16 it came down. So reimbursement lagging a year is now showing up that way. So that's why. Yep.
Stephen?
Shane, just a quick question on the MBTA assessment, and you're right on the yes. Is that usually a 2.5% increase per year, or is that over the past 5 or 10 years, or?
Yeah, it generally is. Sometimes it's a little bit up, but it pretty much averages out that way.
Yeah, roughly. I think last year we did a little better. There was one year a couple of years ago where it was closer to 3%. In general, I think the chair will speak more passionately about it than even I will, but the formula is quite troublesome.
Yeah, no, I hear the other end of the red line is getting a great
yeah.
deal.
Right.
So we're not treated quite fairly in that regard, but in terms of year over year, it stays fairly.
Okay, any other questions on
Did it?
state aid?
So then going down the list, we have school construction aid, which is really the runouts of some reimbursements for the state, for the school building program, that for bonds that we issued, and under an old program from the state, towns would issue all the debt and then be reimbursed over time from the state. They've since changed that and started to forward fund their school participation. So that money runs out in FY21, and once it's gone, it will just be gone. Local receipts, by policy set by the Long Range Planning Committee, we increase local receipts by $100,000 a year. Our actual receipts usually come in higher than these things, but that's part of what Anna referred to as budgeting conservatively, and that is part of what helps us generate free cash every year, to have actuals come in a little bit higher than our estimates. But built into the long range plan is the assumption that local receipts are going to continue to go up, and that has been the case. It's been particularly the case for things like motor vehicle excise tax. As car prices go up, 2.5 mils or 25 mils on that rate continues to go up, although it's not guaranteed to go up. In a recession, you do sometimes see that dip. Free cash. I think everybody knows that free cash is neither free nor is it cash, but it is the state's way of calculating our operating surplus, or basically our fund balance at the end of the year. And so I'm going to go back and refer to this short sheet again, which shows in this instance, a 12-year history of the town's free cash. It is, again, the policy has been enunciated over many years in the long-range plan that in the current year of the plan, we figure out what our free cash has been certified from the previous fiscal year has been, and use half of that in the next year's budget. So if you can see in the upper right-hand corner of this sheet for the fiscal year ending in FY17, we had $9,186,000 certified by the state for our free cash. We then put exactly half of that into the FY19 budget. And then the second part of the long-term range plan is to take the 10-year average of free cash and project that out as our likely free cash number for future years and use half of that number going forward. Free cash is a non-recurring source of funds. You always have to recreate free cash every year. So as long as we continue to have surpluses and don't to spend all our free cash every year and have some to sort of recycle from year to year, that puts us in good shape. It's not bad to use free cash as long as you make sure you regenerate it in the future. And the one thing I know I will be keeping an eye on, and I think we should all keep an eye on, is as our free cash numbers have been at historic highs, we just got to make sure that either we maintain creating that much free cash or we be a little more cautious about how much of it we're willing to use in the future. But for right now, that is what's built into the plan. The next line is a relatively small line. It's called overlay reserve surplus. Every year, the assessors release a certain amount of their overlay, and we use $200,000 of that to help fund the budget. And then, of course, the big driver of all of our revenue is property taxes. And the big question every year is how much new growth we're going to get. And again, if you look back at this small sheet, at the bar graph at the bottom, this shows what the amount of new growth, in other words, new building, and anything that requires a building permit be taken out. Any new construction, whether it's putting up a new building or renovating your kitchen and putting in granite countertops, is considered new growth. The town has seen pretty good new growth over the last 3 to 4 years, over $1 million in each of those years. That is somewhat dependent on the economy. So if housing sales slow down, or if interest rates go up so that people don't have as much money to do those home renovations, new growth could go down. The good thing about new growth is that once it goes into the levy and into your tax base, it's there permanently. And so your tax base grows going forward from that. So we did have a pretty healthy amount of new growth for FY19. And then going forward, what we estimate is that for FY20, we'll have $650,000 of new growth. Then the year after, 600, 550, 500, down to 450. And again, each year we update that with the current number to keep it current. In the tax number is also the excluded debt. So we've had overrides for capital projects. That is built in there. So to the extent that some years you see the levy go up a lot, it can be both because of our new growth and general Proposition 2.5 increase, but also if a debt exclusion override hits, it will bump up that tax number. It then gets taken out down below with our exempt debt and also with what we pay to Minuteman for our assessments. But you will see sometimes a big spike. That doesn't mean we have a lot more money to spend. It just means on operating budget, it means we've had a capital override. And then the final line is the $3,298,000 coming out of the override stabilization fund. As Adam mentioned, during the overrides in the past, Arlington created an override stabilization fund, basically to put money in during the fat years and take money out during the lean years. The current balance of that override stabilization fund is down in the bottom left-hand corner of $23,353,000. It has been building up over the last 7 years or so. FY19 will be the first year of that we'll have to take money out. So this is a significant change in the town's financial outlook and current fiscal reality. And as you'll see, we continue to take money out, another $8.5 million in FY20, and then finally in FY20, $11 million, not because that's exactly the right amount to fund the budget, but that's exactly how much is in the fund. The piggy bank was empty at that point, and so that's all the money there is to take out. So that's the revenue side. Any questions on revenue?
Okay, John?
Sandy, back to the small sheet,
Yeah.
bottom graph, the new growth number.
Yeah.
What exactly does that number represent? Is that property tax revenue on capital additions, or what
So,
exactly
right,
is new growth?
if there's some piece of property that hadn't been taxed before, so if you put up a new house gets built in town that was never there before, you can capture the value of that house over and above the taxation on all the other properties in town. So it's new, and it grows your levy. It also is, as I say, there's sometimes when you make an improvement to a house, let's say you add on a garage, or you completely gut it and put a new kitchen or bathroom or whatever, and the assessors go back and say, well, that used to be a $400,000 house, now it's a $650,000 house. That $250,000 worth of increased value can be assessed by the tax rate as new growth. The other significant thing that we sometimes get is when utilities put in personal property, their equipment, that is sometimes a significant source of new growth for cities and towns. Because again, that's something that hadn't been taxed before. They put in new personal property, new business equipment, and we get to capture that.
That number you're showing here on that line, those are the revenues associated, property tax revenues associated with the increased market value.
Correct.
So, $1 million house times the tax rate would generate $12,000, say, additional, at a $12 tax rate, gives you $12,000 into that fund. Obviously, if you go to places like Waltham, along 128, between Route 2 and the Mass Pike, on both sides, is all Waltham. So while we're scraping to get $1 million, they're probably getting $5 or $6 million a year in new growth. It's one of the
Well, Lexington, for example, has I think $3 or $3.5 million worth of new growth this year. Smaller population, but much more significant commercial and industrial and business property. And for a lot of reasons, those business properties tend to generate a lot more new growth than residential property does.
where you get condo conversions.
That's probably one of the most significant sources of new growth for Arlington this last year is condo conversions.
For some reason, condos generate a lot more tax revenue than apartments, and which is why the town wanted condos up on top of Sims Hill, not apartments. I'll let the assessors tell you why that happens, but and you can imagine South Boston growth if you've been down there in the last few years, or Kendall Square in Cambridge is can be very jealous of them.
Any other questions on the revenue side? So we've taken in the money, now we're going to spend it. So the first section is the school budget. And I'd say for both the school and town budget, there are guidelines or limits that the long-range plan has in place to predict and control spending. So for the school department, the top line is general education costs. And that goes up every year by 3.5%. I'm going to come back to that in a second and explain why it shows 10.5%, but it really is 3.5% of baseline growth. Special education costs go up by 7% every year as an assumed rate. Then there's a kindergarten fee offset, which I know a lot of you know about, but which when the town went to a full-day kindergarten and stopped collecting fees for that, the school wasn't collecting fees for half-day kindergarten. The town got a lot more Chapter 70 aid, and so to hold the school harmless for the fees they weren't collecting anymore, we built in this $970,000 into the school budget. And then the bottom line here is the growth factor. Based on the enrollment numbers that you see at the very bottom of the sheet, and how many new students there are each year, And you take the number of new students and multiply it by what the state on its website says is the cost to educate students in Arlington. They give an average cost per education for every city and town across the state. We take that and we multiply it by 35% because we know that each additional student doesn't generate new costs, the total average cost, because there's certain sunk costs. I mean, we don't hire a new superintendent, or we don't build new buildings and so forth. So there's certain fixed costs that are in there, and so we attribute to the schools 35% of that average cost. So if you can see it in FY18, we had a growth factor of 1,133,000. That then got carried over to general education costs and increased there, plus the 3.5%. The other thing that's going on in that $42 million figure is we actually did open a new school, or we are going to. We're going to open the Gibbs School, and to account for the operating cost increases inherent in running that building, there's another $1.3 million in there. And then finally, to cap it all off, the increase in student aid, Chapter 70 aid, over and above what was assumed in the fall, that $241,000 that was on this sheet, is also added into the school budget. Based on a discussion at the Long Range Planning Committee, it was decided to put that in and then confirm that that will be the case once we see what the House budget is and what their state aid numbers are. But given that it's an election year, it is doubtful that those numbers are going to go down in the legislature from what the governor's proposed. So we will see, trust but verify. That gives the school budget an overall increase of 8.5%, which, given that our general revenues are going up 4%, is, I think, a pretty hefty increase. But it, also reflects a lot of what's going on because of enrollment growth and because of the gifts. We then get to Minuteman.
Okay, why don't we start? Is there any questions then on the local school increases? Carolyn?
So the 1.3 million for Gibbs is operating expenses, that's what I anticipate an increase in operating
Yep. Okay.
Well, that's it.
Yep, okay, good. Minuteman, we have numbers from the Minuteman School Committee for their preliminary assessment. I think their vote, exactly what date, I don't think they've actually voted it yet. But they will vote a final number, but they have generally been pretty good about predicting these numbers here. It is a 15% increase. The operating side of their budget is going up by 3% or less. I forget the exact percentage. The major increase in there is really the first tranche of the debt for building the new Minuteman School. So it's reflected both in what we have to pay Minuteman and up above in our property tax because of the excluded debt that shows up there. Then we get to the town budget. The overall benchmark for town expenses, increasing or not, is 3.25%. And if you see under the net town budget, that we are slightly below that. We're at 3.23%. It's made up of three components. One is personal services, in other words, what we pay people, expenses, and then an offset for what we charge, mostly to the water and sewer fund for the time that town officials are spending working on water and sewer related activities. So the treasurer's office mailing out water and sewer bills, or the time that Adam and I take dealing with water and sewer issues, and the time IT spends on those sort of things. So there's a whole range. There are formulas and percentages that were set out based on looking at the amount of time that people put into that. And so that is an offset. It's subtracted from the gross cost of operating the town budget to get to a net number, which is a $35.7 million. In other words, a 3.23% increase. Any questions about town spending side? All right. There's an MWRA debt shift. Arlington's one, maybe the last town or one of the few towns in the state that took advantage of a state law that allows us to figure out how much of our MWRA assessment is related to capital, shift that out of the water and sewer rates, and add it over and above to our regular 2.5 assessment. And that has just it's been held steady for several years. Again, can go into more detail if people have questions, but it doesn't change. Capital is based on setting our capital spending at 5% of the budget, so we have an exempt debt service amount of $1.9 million, which is basically, again, an offset for some of the property taxes up above. And then the real spending is our non-exempt debt service, in other words, paying off the bonds that we've issued in the past for various capital projects, plus the cash that we are using to buy things. So some of our capital spending is big things, we issue bonds for that. Some of them are smaller things and we pay cash. And then there are various offsets there too. In other words, other sources, whether they're things like the antenna fund or money coming from the Rink Enterprise Fund that offset some of the bonds that we have up above there, so that you get to that net figure of $10,356,000, which really will then represent 5% of the budget according to our policies. Pensions, that comes straight from our retirement board. It is generally in the long run based on assuming a 5.5% increase in those costs. From year to year, that can vary for a variety of reasons. The performance of the markets in the short term can affect that, and sometimes the number of people who have retired recently. So we did see a little bit of a bump in that this year. Insurance, these are preliminary numbers based on current enrollment of employees and retirees in our health insurance plans, and assuming a 5% increase in rates. We will know for sure what those rates are in March when the GIC comes out with its final rates. And from what we know of what they've been doing, we know they've been trying very hard to keep those rates from going up very much. You may have noticed there was a lot of controversy about that recently. But what we've generally been seeing is there's certain parts of our health insurance that don't increase that much, particularly the health insurance for retirees, because retiree plans and Medicare D and so forth, the federal government has been doing a lot of cost controls on those things, and so those rates don't go up generally very much. The actives do tend to go up a little bit more. We have seen a drop-off in the number of people enrolling. We do have a program to provide people dollar incentives if they don't take health insurance for the town, and we have seen some of the benefits of that. So overall, I think for FY19 it's a good number, even though we continue to get a lot more teachers along with that enrollment growth. So this reflects both the insurance, health insurance for the teachers and the town employees. So far I think we're in good shape, and I'm hoping when we get the final GIC numbers, we'll continue to have good numbers. State assessments, as I said before, they give it and they take it away. Those numbers are there. Overlay reserve, every year we set aside a certain amount in the overlay in case people file tax abatements. Every 2 years, it's $600,000, and every third year, which is a reval year, we put aside another, a total of $800,000. And then those numbers get trued up to get to really a 1% of our levy when we finally set the tax rate in the fall. That's why you see in FY18 it's a little bit larger, but for budgeting purposes, we'd go forward on this 800, 600, 600 basis. Reserve fund is set at 1% of revenues. That's a new policy the Finance Committee had from a couple of years ago to provide adequate reserves and to make sure there's enough money for reserves, especially for snow and ice. Court judgments and Sims property, we're still paying off debt on the Sims property. That will go away in a couple of years. And then there's just a placeholder here of $100,000 going forward in case there are kind of court judgments we have to pay at the end of the year that we can't really go to town meeting for an appropriation, but we can put on the tax rate. So we leave that. If they don't end up being there, we don't take advantage of it, but it's a placeholder. Warrant articles, there are various warrant articles from time to time, and looking at the specifics, we just put that in. And then the last line is override stabilization fund. In the fat years, we've added to that, so in FY18, we've added to that $211,000, but going forward, as you see, there's no room to add, so we don't. And then it all comes out to a balanced budget for FY19, FY20, and then in FY21, we start to see deficits, and really significant deficits after that. So I've done a lot of talking. Let me see if there are questions.
Okay, the exempt debt service, we have it going from round numbers 3.2 million down to 1.9 million. That's a huge drop. It was always my understanding that we were going to try to level that off. Is that still in the cards?
It's still nearly level because just about 600 or a little more than $600,000 of debt service of exempt debt is carried in the Minuteman line.
I'm sorry,
that,
under the...
in the Minuteman line, because of the Minuteman exempt debt, we carry it in the assessment line. So the total exempt debt service is probably closer to 2.5, 2.6 million than 1.9. So it's closer to level than it appears. As the Gibbs debt begins to roll on, which I don't think is projected here right now, that will bump that number back up to above 3 million.
Why not borrow another 600,000 and just pay it off and, bump it right up?
That certainly happy to talk to the treasurer about that, but I think it's a worthwhile.
Yeah, just so we don't go like, this is much. Yeah, I mean, you could borrow a bond anticipation note for $600,000, use that, you're going to use it, and then just retire it within the fiscal year, and you've got leveled off. Of course, you'll probably, if he goes out for a big bond, will have a 6-month interest payment in there that could boost that up for next year. But yeah, you see with Minuteman, it'll be nice just to have it go steady up as opposed to all of a sudden shoot up. Okay, other questions?
You mentioned the Gibbs payments are not in this budget? Gibbs debt service is not?
They haven't been borrowed yet.
They haven't been borrowed, okay.
Just clarification again, the debt that shifted to the Minuteman appropriation, is that part of the 5%? Is that included in the 5% capital?
No. Exempt debt is not.
It's in excess.
No exempt debt is part of the 5% capital.
Stephen?
Just an observation, Sandy, with the Municipal Modernization Act changed the reval cycle to 5 years now, and Arlington may have, I don't know where Arlington fits in because the DOR went back and changed some of the years.
Yep.
So there may be 200,000 that needs to be moved. I don't think it's going to be in 19, it might be in 20, but it's still going to be 200,000, so I don't know if it's going to make a big difference, but I just, if you know or you don't, I don't know. And then after that, it'll be every 5 years. So that may help us for $200,000 in a couple of years, but.
Yeah, I forget that, I think it's 21 the next time
Okay.
we're up.
Yeah.
But don't hold me to that. but I think that's
Yeah,
right.
I know they changed it too because they wanted to have 20% of the communities each year as opposed to a third, and I don't know where we fit in there.
That's right.
Okay, David?
So, I mean, can you talk about the range of property tax increases that would be required to zero out the deficits seen in 2022?
So,
That's good.
So the conversation at the long-range planning meetings has looked at, and no votes have been taken, and the Board of Selectmen is the only body that can vote to put tax questions on the ballot. But the conventional wisdom around the table from members of the Board of Selectmen, school committee members, finance committee members that participate is that asking for both an operating override and a debt exclusion for the high school next spring or early summer of 2019, so before FY20, would be strategically an advantageous approach because campaigns could be aligned and the uncertainty of what a tax increase could be would be eliminated, right? The tax increase would be known on one ballot. Also, you can see those numbers: $600,000, all the way up to 16 million plus 19 million. That's a lot of deficit to make up in a 3-year period. So to ask for an override to wait till FY21, you're roughly talking about needing to ask for a $12 or $13 million override to be able to make up those deficits in 3 years. That would probably be the single largest operating override, I think, in the history of Massachusetts. So that would be very challenging. Asking for an FY20, Sandy, we didn't bring those tonight. We'll be rolling those out more officially at the Budget and Revenue Task Force meeting at the end of February. If you ask for an FY20, it comes down, for round number's sake, probably in the $10 million range to be able to balance through. And looking at the averages, the impact of the operating override, probably somewhere in the vicinity of $700 on the average tax bill to $1,000, depending on if you want to go for 3 or 5 years to see how long it lasts. And these are definitely ballpark numbers. The high school project, if it's about a $200 million project and we get, slightly less than 50% reimbursement, that's probably a $400 or $500 impact on the average tax bill. So we're talking about the annual impact on the average taxpayer that's probably, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 a year. So it's significant.
Average is probably like 15% increase.
Would you combine the two? Yes. Yeah.
And that will no longer be taxed to government.
Say that again?
They'll no longer be taxed to government. Okay, if you think the average tax bill is about probably $10,000.
Correct.
That's it's important to think about.
We've been talking about doing another override in 2019 anyway for a number of years now. Just anticipating that we'll need to do one around that time.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's not, it's new to you because you've been, but it's not new to most people.
Oh, okay. Now I can ask questions, though, right?
Oh, yes, you can.
Please allow me to,
Yes, because others will forget things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a big impact. And so the more people start talking about it, probably the better.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, other questions on the long-term plan? Well, part of it is going to be on how soon the high school is ready to go. Could you discuss that timeline a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the midst of the feasibility study process for the high school renovation rebuild. So we have a project manager on board, we have an architect on board, a school building committee. We're beginning to study options. And actually, probably within the course of the next month, we're going to start looking at, and these ideas will also be made public, what some of the options are. We have to look at a renovation. We have to look at a new construction. We have to look at an ad reno. We're even going to kick the tires on some potential alternative sites in town, which is quite complicated, but the due diligence will do that. So that will take the better part of the rest of this spring into early summer. Then early summer we'll go to the MSBA with what's called a preliminary design program, PDP, and get agreement from them. Then the architects will work over the course of the summer, work with the school building committee, and hopefully by the end of August we'll have our preferred design alternative. That's what we want to do. We got to go to the MSBA, get them to agree to it, and then have a project that the architects can begin working on schematic design, and it's via schematic design that you can actually start to get your head around what it might cost. Prior to schematic design, it's taking square footage multiplied by industry square footage costs and coming up with a number, which is meaningful, but doesn't really give you a firm grip on what it might cost. But if we meet all those timelines, go through schematic design. Schematic design takes until probably early to mid-spring of calendar year 2019. Then we get a cost estimate, then we go to the MSBA, get them on board, They could then come back to the town and say, you have to execute a project funding agreement, and to execute a project funding agreement, you need to have the money. So to have the money, you need both an appropriation of town meeting and a debt exclusion. At least in Arlington, given the size of this, you would need a debt exclusion to back up that money. So that puts us, if we meet all those timelines, that puts us on the timeline to be able to ask for that debt exclusion again. Probably early summer, maybe late spring, being early June, or maybe slipping into early summer of 2019. Which I believe has been the timing of operating override votes the past 2 times. I know in 2011 it was in June of 2011. I'm not positive, but I think it was the same in 2005 as well.
Now, I understand you're taking feedback on programmatic issues. How much space for a library, how much space for this, and all of that. At what point will you be getting feedback from citizens on whether to renovate the building or build a new one, or those type of issues?
So we had 2 public forums so far, and you're right. One was sort of broad thinking about, what's your wish list for a high school? Last night we had another one about the educational vision, so like you said, the programmatic needs. We're gonna have 2 additional forums in March and then in April, and in those 2, we're gonna have the public be able to start looking at options that the architect has put together, and that's the opportunity for citizens to come and start to give feedback on, like you said, at reno, total reno, knock down, rebuild, whatever it might be. I don't have those dates handy, but I can circulate them to the committee.
And
Yeah,
at that
you should
time, we'll
those.
also have some preliminary cost estimates for what those different scenarios will look like.
Okay. Carolyn and then David?
The DPW renovation is in budget for this year or next year?
For FY20, next.
For FY20, okay. And that will go in conjunction with the high school rebuild or whatever we decide, knowing that we may move the high school, we may use the high school site and need construction access.
Yeah, the answer is yes. So we now have, I mentioned we have the high school project team. We also have the DPW project team put together. We have an OPM, we have an architect. They're fully on board. They've presented to the PTBC, and hopefully actually in the next 2 weeks, we're gonna have the DPW project team, the high school project team meet and start talking about, where there could be some shifting of borders, cooperations, looking at how the projects will coexist and interact with one another.
Does the override we just discussed, call it 10 to 15% that would occur next year, would that zero out 2023 as well?
Yes.
It would.
Well, I want to be clear. There's multiple scenarios, and in them, there will be much further, I think, political triangulating around numbers. And do you ask for a lower number that gets through 21, 22, 23? Do you ask for a bigger number that gets out to 24? And sort of what the pros and cons of, do you stretch and ask for 10 million and get it for 4 or 5 years so you don't have to ask again, or do you still ask for a big number and have to come back 3 years from now? And there'll be a lot of discussion about that, I think, in the next couple months.
Okay.
The ultimate decision on what ballot number rests with the Board of Selectmen. But of course, they're always looking for input from citizens, because you need to ask for something that you have a chance of getting on that. And of course, all this is based upon a continuation of the current economic climate. You hit a recession, state aid tanks, motor vehicle excise tanks, and you got a whole different ballgame.
Correct.
Okay, are there any other questions on the 5-year plan? Like I said, it's sort of the heart and soul of our plan. A lot of people, long-range planning committee consists of the manager's office, superintendent's office, school committee. FinCom has 3 people on it, capital budget, manager, selectman, treasurer. So a lot of work goes into it. If we have questions, now's a good time to raise them. And of course, the manager's number. You can always call him directly.
You know where to find me.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is go through the warrant. And as long as we have the manager here, we're going to go through this twice. First time is to look at all the articles that the town manager has submitted and that have a financial impact. So most of those start, if you take the warrant out, on page 7. Let me ask the manager a question on Article 17. Are you nervous that this would, this is on demolition of historic structures, that this is going to substantially increase the impact on the Historic Commission?
I'm more concerned that it would have a significant impact on our new growth. That's, I'm not unconcerned with the impact on the Historic Commission, but I think that's a marginal impact as opposed to the impact it would have on new growth in town.
Okay, by the way, demolition of historic structures, well, how many historic structures get demolished? To qualify for demolition of a historic structure, all you have to do is change 25% of the exterior of your building, and you count. So if you live in a house that's on their list, then if you go in to put in replacement windows, they'll probably count that as a substantial change, and they could be held up for quite a long time. And so it's not just a tear down, it's anything involving over 25%. And it would be interesting to know what percentage of the structures in this town are more than 50 years old.
Probably a lot.
It's got to be 90%. I mean, it's the whole
Yeah.
town.
So I just sort of raised that as an issue people want to consider. Okay, why don't we start with Article 25 and 26.
So, let me just back up here, because, I mean, you made a good comment, but, I mean, if we got into debate on this, would you then, like, revise these estimates on new growth assumptions? I mean, would you show the cost-benefit analysis on the long-term plan?
I think we have to.
You know, based if we, and when this comes up to debate, like.
Yeah, I think we absolutely have to.
So at the moment, is it 50 years or they want to change it to 50?
Now, there is a list on the Historic Commission, and you might be surprised. I found my house on it. I found my past house on it. But if you go on the town website, go to the Arlington Historic Commission, not the district commissions, the Arlington Historic Commission, and on there is a list of all buildings that they consider historic. And
There's more than 1,000 of them.
yeah, it's a lot of houses, and they have been known to hold up projects for a long time.
A year.
Yeah. So, all of a sudden you find your house on it, and your replacement window project goes down the tubes. Yeah, they're not as strict as the historic district commissions, because those are under. But it's you might be surprised to find your house there. Okay, Article 25 and 26. Because this is something new, if you could give an overview.
So 25 and 26 are related. For a very long time now, the town has had agreements with Comcast, Verizon, and RCN. And those agreements have monies coming to the town in the form of both a percentage of operating revenue as well as capital costs or capital contributions that those three cable providers will make to the town. And those monies all go to ACMi as the local cable access corporation. Every city or town has that arrangement. Not every city or town has three providers, but every city or town has that arrangement with their cable provider. Some cities or towns do the local cable access themselves. Most have an arrangement like we have in Arlington with ACMi. That's a nonprofit third party that provides the local cable access. Historically, those agreements have been made, approved by the Board of Selectmen, money's collected, and transferred administratively to ACMi. I believe 2 years ago, state law changed requiring all those monies to be appropriated by the city or town's legislative body. They then gave us a little bit of a reprieve to put something in place So what this has us doing is both accepting the legislation so that we formally are in compliance with state law, and then appropriating funds that will go to ACMi. Still need to meet with ACMi to build out their budget so we can adequately present to town meeting, but what I envision this looking like operationally is appropriating a lump sum of money for operating, a lump sum of money for capital that goes into a PEG reserve fund that we then transfer over the course of the year as the monies are received to ACMi. But again, we'll break that down for both the committee's review and town meeting's review before asking for any recommendations.
Okay, when do you anticipate you'll have that available?
Probably within the next month or so, maybe a month.
So there's nothing really new here, it's the process.
Correct.
Instead of the transfer taking place administratively, has to go into the, does it still get segregated, the money, and
Yes.
then transferred?
Correct.
Okay. They can't, you segregate the money, but it can't be transferred unless the town meeting approves Article 26.
Exactly right.
Okay. Is there any questions on that? Peter?
I want to make sure I understand. There's no cost to this change, is that right?
Correct. No taxpayer impact, really, not even really a financial change, just a process change.
By the way, what is PEG?
Public education and government. So there's a public channel, public access channel, education channel, and a government access channel.
And this is for 25 and 26?
Yeah, so 25 is the acceptance, official acceptance of the legislation, and
Okay.
26 is the vote of the appropriation.
Okay, any other questions on that? Okay. Legislation, and then this is the appropriation. Okay, 27, actually now that I think about it, we probably should have put that later, but there's 3 articles, and Liz, we need to have a hearing with the Contributory Retirement Board, so you need to call them, ask to speak to Rich Greco.
I
And,
sent him an email, actually, reminding him, I just sent him another email,
okay,
reminding him that we needed to know if we needed to.
okay, so it's Article 27, and then there's 2 others, Article 43 and 44.
Those are all them?
Those are all the Contributory Retirement Board, Rich Greco. So set them up for hearing. I know the chairman is around, but I think last year Rich just handled it himself. So those 3.
He traveled longer last year, he might be around this year.
I'm sorry?
He traveled longer last year, he might be around this year.
Okay, whichever, we'll let them,
Yeah.
whatever, let them decide. So 27, 43, and 44. Okay. Endorsement of the parking benefit district expenditures. Now, we already passed an authorization at the Springtown meeting, at the town meeting on Monday. Will you need an additional, this will be for next year, right?
Yeah, so I have a parking implementation and governance committee meeting next week, early next week. We as a group need to consider whether or not we want to just spend down what was authorized on Monday night before we come back potentially at 2019's annual town meeting or at a future special town meeting, or if there is some expenditure we want to have authorized and ready to go based on the work that was authorized Monday. So I need to flesh that out with the parking implementation and governance committee. And so I'll know by early next week if that will be a no action or if we think we'll have something.
Okay, so you anticipate that the money that was approved by town meeting on Monday could go take care of 19 also, fiscal 19?
Yeah, I think what we need to get clarity on is the biggest expenditure we looked at was hiring a designer for the Russell Common lot and to make improvements to both the Russell Common lot and Park Terrace that connects from Medford Street to the Russell Common lot. If we legitimately think that we can have design done and start to go out for actual construction and to have those improvements made in FY19, then we probably do want to ask for more money. But before I ask for it, I want to get confidence that we can actually have that design work done to be ready to go.
Okay. If anybody has any questions on that, Alan?
Do you think the committee will develop any kind of policy for proportion of, say, operating versus capital, or what percentage of projected revenues to be appropriated, or is there funds can be rolled over and accumulated for bigger projects later? I mean, do you think there'll be some policies developed on how to appropriate the projected revenues?
Yeah, so we haven't specifically talked about it in that framework, but I do think we will start to move towards, once we meet some of the operational needs that the committee would like to see, I think we'd probably like to reserve a lot of the funds to offset any expenditures the town needs to make towards a more comprehensive redo of Mass Ave in the center. So we did not get the Mass Works grant. We're still working with MassDOT to see if funding's a possibility. So I think if we want to see Mass Ave Phase 2 happen, the town's going to have to put some skin in the game, and using parking benefit monies to be part of that skin could be helpful. So I think we'll frame the conversation in that regard.
Okay, so all that work on the redoing Mass Ave from Mill down to the fire station, we didn't get those grants?
No.
Okay. Because I think that's how a lot of people are hoping to get rid of the brick sidewalks. Okay. Any other questions? Carolyn?
Any chance of, the Russell one is the one behind AC and the Mass Ave stores?
Correct.
Any chance of that becoming 2 levels?
So I will say that we've never seen parking data that suggests it's needed.
Okay.
In terms of, we've done counts on weeknights, weekend nights, weekdays, weekend days, and there is capacity in Arlington Center. I know that might seem funny. At times we've been trying to find parking space and you can't, but we've yet to see data that suggests that we need more. I don't want to dismiss it entirely, but that is huge money to do that.
Right. Yes, exactly. And then to maintain it.
Yes.
Having worked at Mount Auburn Hospital and watched that parking lot over the years.
Peter?
The parking, unspent parking benefit money rolls over or collects, is that correct?
Correct.
Pauls, have you had any questions? Nope? Okay. Didn't want to leave you out. Okay, reclassification, we do collective bargaining. How's that going?
Off to a good start. Due to the good work of Sandy and Karen Malloy, the HR director, we have one agreement with the librarians. So we'll, at the very least, be able to bring that agreement forward. The goal is always to have, when we're in a bargaining year, have the agreements ready for town meeting, given the proximity to the town meeting and the amount of bargaining still to do. It's not likely that we'll have every bargaining unit ready. Hopefully we'll have 2 or 3 ready for the Finance Committee's review and approval in the town meeting. So as we've done in past years, what we would likely do, ask for approval for all the agreements we have, and then put aside a reserve for the remainder so that we can budget for it in the FY19 budget and then come back at a future town meeting to actually award the contracts.
Shouldn't we have an article to set aside money in a reserve?
I comprehensively looked back, and in the past 10 years we've done that reserve under this article.
Okay. I just seem to remember at times we've had a separate article to do that, but
Yeah, I did too, and yet I couldn't find it. It's because I'm not sure where it was.
to see, okay. Maybe adding a few words here
Yeah.
that just simply says, or to set aside reserve, might clarify that.
What article is this?
30.
Thank you.
Yeah, that might be, because right now it doesn't really read like that. So a few words like that might help. Okay, any questions on collective bargaining, David?
Is that number, or do we have a good number kind of assumption embedded in the FY19 budget?
We embed
Not to tip your-
in the net town budget, there is a reserve for collective bargaining in total, and the school department does the same.
Is the school department and the town coordinating their efforts?
We are. I think it may, we're taking an approach that may not result in perfect COLA matches, because we're both looking at steps and maybe addition of steps, changing of steps, so it might be a little more complicated than just a straight COLA, but in terms of average cost, we'll be on the same page.
Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, budgets, capital budget. Any numbers on water or sewer? 34, 35?
I wish I might do this. Yeah, we'll have to finalize the capital.
Capital, okay, sure. Okay, Minuteman, committees and commissions. Okay, we're going directly to these. Most are fine with what they have. Miscellaneous, water bodies, we have a hearing for. Community preservation, we have a hearing for. Harry Barber is requesting the same. Contributory retirement board. Okay. The rest are the standard articles. Okay,
Al, excuse me if I may, one piece that I think I failed to mention in the long-range plan, but is covered under Article 44. Under warrant articles in the long-range plan, the lion's share of that is our contribution to OPEB, our retiree healthcare trust fund. So that's what we accomplished under that article. So we put almost $900,000 aside for that. We put the difference between $500,000 and what our actual non-contributory retirement allocation is. That's almost, I think that in and of itself is almost $500,000 now. We put a flat $155,000 that was sort of cemented in a number of years ago when the town made a change in the retiree healthcare contribution and saved $155,000 a year. And then we proposed to take $300,000 a year out of the town's employer healthcare trust fund from when it was self-insured. The idea being that that money can be used for healthcare, and OPEB is retiree healthcare. Move it over in a responsible way such that there's still currently a $2 million balance in that employer healthcare trust fund. If we ever did decide to leave the GIC and go back out on our own, we would have at least the seed for starting our own healthcare trust fund again.
do you anticipate bringing that down to zero, or do you going to leave, would you leave a minimum now, say $1 million in there?
You know, I would like to see how the next couple years of the GIC work out. You know, obviously there was quite a bit of news about it this spring, so I think if there is regained stability in the GIC, we could talk about bringing that down further. If we think that there may be a chance that we want to make a move, I would want to keep some of that, like cut it off in some balance.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, this is where I open it up. Are there any other questions for the manager on anything that you?
Or the
not
deputy,
anything.
or the deputy town.
Alan.
Could you talk a little bit about Article 19? One of my favorite topics.
I haven't memorized the numbers yet, sorry.
Home rule legislation, finance department. So really 18 and 19 sort of go together.
Is this Dean's retirement plan?
So I guess I would say, since I've worked here and working with my predecessor, Brian Sullivan, community the size of Arlington, the complexity of Arlington, having a professional municipal finance department, I think is long overdue. So I think efforts to make the treasurer's office professional, which will be on the ballot this spring, as well as making the comptroller in some shape or form an official part of the municipal finance department that's managed by a day-to-day professional, whether it be a finance director or directly the town manager, I think makes a lot of sense for many reasons.
Do you think the finance committee should opine on that, or should we just stay on it?
I would imagine you'll be asked to opine, or someone would like to know what the finance committee thinks about it. So, I think I would suggest taking some position and having some dialogue with the treasurer, and I'd be happy to come back and be part of that dialogue. It seems to make sense.
Okay. Liz, could you invite the treasurer to come in? I assume you want to hear it, Alan. Come in on Articles 18 and 19, in any other of his articles, and schedule, see if he can get here. He knows where we are.
So who does the comptroller report to now? No one but himself?
Right now, the Board of Selectmen
Okay.
appoints the comptroller. And my feeling is maintaining attachment to the Board of Selectmen in some shape or form makes a lot of sense from both the sort of formal and informal whistleblower protection point of view. But I also think that having that person know that on a day-to-day basis they report to somebody who works in the same building or a nearby building also makes a lot of sense. So I feel like, unlike most of the town manager appointments in Arlington, having the comptroller be appointed by the town manager but subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen, and also having termination subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen, would be a middle-of-the-road approach to gain that day-to-day administrative oversight as well as having a connection to the governing body of the town.
When we hired the current comptroller, were you involved in that position?
I was, yes,
Okay.
I was.
Other questions for the manager? Peter?
Have you thought about what to do about the legal defense fund?
Yeah, we've talked it through. I don't think we haven't seen quotes from an insurance company yet, right? I think we had some initial discussions with our insurer. It gets more complicated than I thought it would be in terms of providing them with a lot of data, so we haven't done that yet. I think right now where we sit with the amount of our operating reserve fund, I'm not compelled in the short term to come back and ask for more money than what had been proposed in the FY19 budget. Putting together the FY20 budget, maybe we'll think about looking at recapitalizing the legal defense fund. Or, to be frank, I'm not sure the legal defense fund is the perfect instrument for what we discussed at the last meeting. It's an applicable instrument, but not the perfect instrument. I think having some fund available for settlements, yet to be named, is probably a better instrument for having some authorized expenditure for settling cases against the town.
Is there a crying need to have the ability is there urgency in approving those kinds of expenses that for which you don't need to come back to the finance committee?
Usually the attorney representing the person that's in a suit with the town feels a sense of urgency. Because they probably haven't been paid for however many months or years long that the discussion's been happening. So, I don't mean to be glib about it, but usually town council is looking to have access to the funds from the time a settlement's agreed to, maybe a 2-month time frame. Dragging it on beyond that starts to get a little hard. So usually, depending on the time of year, that would give us an opportunity to come back to the finance committee or convene the finance committee. It's not out of the realm of a reasonable request.
Is there any reason, Alan, why we could have a several months delay on something like that?
Now, you're talking about the budget within the legal budget, the amount there?
No.
Okay, you're
Legal
talking
defense
the
fund.
warrant?
It's the defense fund that's available to do certain kinds of payments, but doesn't show in the budget.
Okay.
Could we spend it down in January? The question is, do we need to replenish it or find a different mechanism?
Well, it seems to be the reserve fund. The general reserve fund is always unavailable.
Yeah, but the question is, can we promise to approve that kind of expenditure in less than a month, say?
It seems to be from January on we can.
I don't think so.
We're starting our meeting in early to mid-February.
But when we're not meeting, you and the vice chair have,
Up to 25,000.
yeah.
So I would think the reserve fund could take care of it. And during the first 6 months of the year, we could take care of small amounts.
Yeah.
And if it's a big emergency, we call the FinCom.
In total reality, too, in the first 6 months of the year, we'll have budgetary flexibility in the legal department's actual legal expenses budget, knowing that we would likely be expending the majority of those funds over the course of the rest of the year. But let's say there was a $50,000 settlement in November. We could likely pay for that out of the legal expenses budget. but then come back here in February and say that we need to replenish that with a reserve fund transfer.
I would think that could take care of it. We haven't had a problem to date.
And we've done that in the past for legal defense fund, other kinds of funds.
Yeah.
Correct.
Other kinds of legal.
John?
While you're here, what's going on with the Mugar property?
So right now, there was a, so take a, sorry, step back from step back. We are, before the Housing Appeals Committee at the state, arguing with the developer over whether or not 1.5% of the town's land mass is dedicated to affordable housing. So we say it is, the developer says our numbers are wrong. Part of the calculation of that 1.5% land mass deals with homes that are on the subsidized housing inventory that are group homes run by the state, both DMH and DPH. But DMH and DPH won't give us specific address information about those homes when we're calculating our land mass. So that makes it, we have to make an assumption of what that might be. So we went to the Housing Appeals Committee. We're arguing we need that information. The state is saying that they can't or won't give us that information. So we had to, for lack of a better term, sue the state for that information from DMH and DPH. That suit was filed in June. It's now fully briefed, and I'm not sure exactly when it will be heard, but it should be very shortly. And we fully expect to then get that information. A handful of other communities have already gone through this exact same process and received the information by going to court. Once we have that information, we'll then go back before the Housing Appeals Committee, and they'll make a ruling on whether or not they think we're at the 1.5% land mass calculation. After that, if we are right, we have safe harbor, and the ZBA would have the authority to outright reject the proposal from Oak Tree at the Mugar property. If the Housing Appeals Committee says they disagree with our methodology, then we're not at the 1.5%. Then the hearing goes back to the ZBA to consider the permit and certainly try to issue the permit or deny the permit or issue the permit with conditions, but have a tough road ahead of them based on the powers of 40B.
Is there any appeal above that, above the state hearing?
So we can both litigate, and so can abutters. So there will be both opportunities for the town to consider, how long it wants to continue to litigate, and certainly for abutters to litigate.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Steve? Oh, John.
Yes, thank you.
It was helpful.
Yeah. You're down there too. Are there any other questions for the manager? David?
Because it's Valentine's Day. I mean, what, can you just talk about the variance in warrant articles in 18 versus 19? Like, why did we spend, I know the warrant article is roughly $900,000 a year, but why we spent $400,000 more in 18? Was it because of a special town meeting, or is it?
So in 18, that was, so you'll see up above in the revenues for the override reserve surplus, $500,000. So FY18, we started the 10-year revaluation process where we have to literally try to go into people's homes to value, to assess their property. So we asked for 300 more to pay for that up above and appropriated 300 more down below. So it doesn't explain the entirety of the difference, but it narrows that gap substantially.
By the way, if you look at fiscal year 18 here, you'll notice it's different than the fiscal 18 we had in the Finance Committee report, because they make adjustments based upon, with the final numbers, so it varies a little bit from there.
Can I just say, we used to have a separate line for elections. We now try to compress this and we moved elections down into warrant articles, so that it cost, there's going to be more elections next year.
Yeah.
Other questions? How's our snow budget doing? You sent us a form. It looks like we still have a little surplus.
So, and that was before the last sort of bout of sanding we had, so I haven't seen an update from Mike, but I would guess we're probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 over budget, which frankly is not
too bad.
Not all that bad.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions for the manager? Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And if you want, I could write a note to your wives about why you're here?
That might make it worse. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
We should have given you a Valentine or something. That's okay, we're going through the same thing. Yeah. Okay, why don't we just start with Article 6 in the warrant? And just go through them to see, because 1 through 5 are just standard. Okay, Article 6, everybody got it out? Still there.
I was just here for Sandy.
Alan, could you forward to Paul the, or maybe you already, Paul, do you have the warrant?
He's having a lot of connection issues.
Well,
Should be able to hear. Paul, can you hear us? Okay.
I was just wondering if you had the warrant. Well,
Alan, ask him if he has the warrant.
You have the warrant?
you do? Okay. Okay, so Article 6 is Capital Planning Committee adjustments. And since we have the Capital Budget Committee coming in anyway, if anybody's interested in Article 6, you can ask them at that point. Now I'm going to go through these and just say, Selectmen, no hearing here. And if you want to stop and say, no, it's not here that, or what's what the, we want to hear that, you got to speak up. Because I want to go through the whole thing. Okay, 7 is town meeting warrant delivery. That seems like a Selectman article. Article 8 is from the treasurer on delinquent real estate. Now, and 9 is on financial information. So, since we're having the treasurer come in on the other 2 articles, if anybody's interested in these 2, you can ask him when he comes in. So Liz, why don't you, when you ask the treasurer to come in, we want him to speak on 18 and 19, but be ready to answer any questions on 8 and 9. On those. David?
Just a quick question back on Article 7. Presumably, I guess maybe at a town meeting, there'll be some discussion around maybe the proposed long-term savings that we might see, if we change the method of delivery, I imagine, on more articles. There'd be some discussion around this long-term savings we'd see in the budgets if we change the method of delivery. We get that discussion at town meeting.
Yeah, I would think it would be fairly trivial.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Changing the manner of delivery of the warrant to every dwelling. They might try to do it electronically or something like that, but, if it's any significant amount of money, who has the selectman? Okay, this is the town moderator. Who handles the moderator's budget? Peter?
Yes.
David? Could you ask the moderator if what their plans are and they have a sense of, will there be some savings here?
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 10, animal control regulations, selectmen. Vacant store front registry, selectmen. Betterment bylaw revision. That sounds like a good selectman article. Arlington Commission on Arts, alter membership composition, expand. I think this goes in line, remember last year we gave them a lot more jobs to do. And I have a feeling this goes right along with that. So I think the selectmen could handle that. Tree preservation.
There's going to, presumably their budget's going to be on the other article though.
Yeah, the budget, this is just bylaw changes. Okay, bylaw changes for tree preservation. Requirement for increased fees. I think the selectmen can handle that. Noise abatement, selectmen.
Yeah, excuse me for 1 second. The tree committee's coming in on February 21st.
Okay, why? Do they get an appropriate?
They requested a hearing.
Oh,
John Ellis,
oh, that's right, they got some kind of a budget they want to tell us about?
so would that have something to do with the 14th?
I have no idea. I got the sense that they want to just, they're doing some things they want us to know about. So, that's fine.
There's also, I think in the town budget, there's an increase in their tree warden, full-time staff member as well. That could be part of it.
Is that in the budget?
I think it was proposed in Adam, in the letter that, in the document we got actually last time we were here, that there was like 5 new staff, and one of them was making the tree warden, it's a half-time position now, making it a full-time position.
Okay, so that'll be in the budgets?
Yes.
Okay. So that'll be Todd, you and Christine.
Tree wardens.
Okay, town meeting sessions. This will be interesting. To go to 7 o'clock. Now, that would impact us, because, you know, obviously we would make our meetings before town meetings sort of impossible, unless everybody wants to be here at 6:30 before that.
This has come up at least once before and
Yeah.
lost big.
Yeah, I remember that too. So, well, I don't think it's going to pass. I think the selectmen could deal with it. Demolition of historic structures, you know, that would be under the selectmen. I think it's a huge mistake, but we'll see. Okay, and then the 18 and 19, we have the treasurer's hearing on that. 20, home rule legislation, board of, selectmen could handle that.
Excuse me, Al.
Yes.
On Article 17, based on what was said half an hour ago, that has potentially a big impact, financial impact.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Be interesting.
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay. Selectmen / FinCom. Okay, Liz, could you get a hold of Len Carton? He's on the school committee, so she'll be able to get his number. And could you ask him to come in for a hearing before the FinCom
On Article 17?
on Article 17?
What was his name, you said?
Well, it's right there, inserted at the request of.
Oh, yep, have it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Vision 2020 wants to become Envision Arlington. Well, I suppose that makes sense. That's great. Otherwise, they'd be out of a job.
A couple of years to go. Become a historical.
Okay, 22 is the selectmen. We insert this every year from the Finance Committee in case for some reason the state passes some law that we could take advantage of. It hasn't happened in years, but okay.
There's potentially a cannabis tax.
I'm sorry?
There is potentially a cannabis tax. I don't know what the timing is, but that could actually be fairly large.
Huh, interesting. Is anybody keeping track of this for some reason?
There was a lot of talk about it at AMA.
Okay.
Or at MMA.
Okay, that could be interesting. CBG, that's selectmen. Revolving funds is selectmen. Okay, so then we got 25 and 26. Everybody understand sort of what's happening there? It's basically money that used to come in, be segregated, and then administratively turned over to ACMi. Now the state's saying we have to actually put it in, money comes in, gets segregated, and then the town meeting has to allow the money to go out. So, and then 26 is the actual appropriation. So We got to hear from the manager on that. And then 27, we're going to hear with the retirement board along with those other 2 articles. 28 is parking benefits, so we'll need to hear from that from the manager. Position reclassification, Carolyn, you'll take care of that. Collective bargaining, we'll need to hear from the manager. Okay, budgets. Capital budget we've got scheduled. Rescind goes with the capital budget on 33. Sewer and water, we should hear from the manager, but also Grant usually takes care of that when he does the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. Minuteman, we've got scheduled for March 5th. Steve, that's what you have too?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Minuteman for March 5th?
Yeah, they give me 3 dates, and if that's the best date for the committee, that's fine, okay.
Okay, and could you ask him to see if he could send it electronically, like a few days before the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committees and commissions. The next 3 articles, 38 and 39, Liz is in the process of contacting all these different groups. The basic philosophy we always had in the past is if you want to give them, if you want the same amount of money you got last year, you know, that's fine. You don't need to come in. If you want more money, then you need to come in and tell us why. And most people will save the dread of coming before this group. And pass. And this is money, for the most part, is small money. And Liz is in the process of getting all that back in. Okay, water bodies. Does everybody, Liz, does everybody have a calendar?
Yeah.
Okay. So water bodies is scheduled for the 26th.
There's a couple more that don't appear on that schedule that we've done tonight, so I will add them and then electronically distribute the
Okay.
calendar again.
Good. Well, I want to go through the calendar together so you can pop in with the ones
Okay.
so we could add them in. Okay, community preservation is March 7th hearing. Harry Barber is the same. That we've given them, for new people, this is the program whereby people can do work and then get a certain amount of money they can use for against their rent. They have to pass certain guidelines as far as income and things like that. And we've been doing $7,500 for ever, for a long period of time. Does anybody want them to come in? I mean, do you want to just go with the $7,500?
This schedule is
They are?
on March 7th.
Oh, okay, March 7th, Harry Barber.
No, I'm Harry Bauer. I'm sorry, I thought you was talking about community.
No, Article 42, Harry Barber.
They didn't want to be in
Okay, so they're not scheduled to come in. Does anybody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded for $7,500 for the Harry Barber program. Is there any discussion? Okay, got to speak up here. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, favorable action, $7,500. Unanimous on 214. Okay, great. Okay, the next 2 articles are the contributory retirement board. So Liz is going to have them come in and these are articles which are pretty standard. The other article, which is a little earlier, is new, but they'll go through those when they come in. Okay, and then 45 is a transfer of funds for special education stabilization fund. I raised the issue with the manager whether this is necessary, because I believe last time we drained this. And I think under state law now they could set up their own fund. So by the time we get the final warrant, that might be gone, but we'll see. Now, the rest of the articles are just the standard articles. The overlay reserve, which we get from the assessors, transfer of funds, cemetery, use of free cash, that's where we use, half, long-term stabilization fund, and the, which has been the 100,000 that we've been doing for several years, and then the fiscal stability stabilization fund. That Article 50 is the last thing we do. And you notice we'll make an appropriation to or from. Well, for the last 7 years, we've been putting money to. This is the first year we're taking money from. Now, if anybody comes up with savings, you see that, maybe we really don't need that much money in X or Y or Z. My recommendation to you would be we'll put the money against the override stabilization fund, so we have to take less out of it. We've been using the money for the snow and ice. I talked to Christine about what she thinks of the snow and ice budget, now, and you, Tom. We've been usually trying to get like 75 or 80% of the 10-year average. But, since now we're pulling money out of the long-term stabilization fund, the more we could reduce the need for it, sort of the lower the override might be. And I think that'll be important. Now, I have no expectation that we're going to, shave $2 million off of that. But, 25, 50, whatever we can come up with is fine. I think probably the one time if the GIC insurance, I think Bill usually handles that, comes in less in March, then, we might do better. You probably saw in the newspapers, the GIC originally put forth thing where they were going to go out of state and throw Tufts, Harvard, and Fallon out. And there was such a ruckus raised about that, they retreated substantially. Okay, the calendar. Everybody takes a look at the calendar. First of all, does anybody have any budgets to present tonight? Okay, you can do one. Anybody else?
I could do police. I could do police.
Okay.
Fire or action.
Okay, that sounds good. Dave raised his hand first, so we'll get that. Now, obviously next Monday is a holiday, so we will not be meeting on Washington's birthday. I'm old-fashioned, I still call it Washington's birthday. Okay, on Wednesday, the tree committee will be here. I don't anticipate that will take a huge amount of time. So I would like to get as many budgets as possible. So, all of you with budgets that you can get done by a week from today, please get them ready. We don't want to have to come in here, spend a half hour, and then go home. And that's a waste of all of our time. So
You can do the library budget then.
you do the library, and then, Gary, you said you could do police and fire?
Police, fire, or inspection.
Okay. That would be good. And then,
My pal on the street.
Peter, David, do you have some more by next week?
By the 21st, we could probably do the clerk's budget.
Okay, that sounds good. And then the following Monday, we have the water bodies. That usually takes about an hour. So more budgets for there. Now, Wednesday, the 28th, I am not sure that we're going to have a meeting. So I'm going to leave that free for now. Now, on Monday, March 5th, we have Minuteman. So if you want to put that down and scratch that in on your sheet so we don't have to kill more trees. So Minuteman on the 5th. Community preservation on the 7th. Those usually take half our meeting. So, we could do more budgets or others. Monday, the Human Rights Commission is coming in. I guess, assume they want more money. Pop-up, Liz, is there anything else scheduled for those days?
No, so far we're fine.
Okay. Wednesday, March 14th is capital planning. That usually pretty much takes most of the evening. So that'll be there. March 19th. So we'll do more budgets. March 21st is the school budget. That usually pretty much takes most of the evening. You might want to check and see about getting more chairs. Sometimes we need that. Even though last time there weren't really many people who came, outside people. Now, so all of these, I'd like, if we finish a half hour early, I'd like to go through some budgets to the degree we can. Monday and Wednesday, the 26th and 28th, I basically want to finish up those days. I want to have all the budgets done, the warrant articles done, and basically be finished by the 28th. So that's my goal. If we finish on the 26th, you can take the 28th off. But that's the goal. Now, there will be no meetings on Monday, the 2nd, April 2nd, or April 4th. And probably no meeting on the 9th. So I think if you want to take a week off and go someplace nice, that first week in April will be the time to do it. I know that's my plan. Now, the last thing we're waiting for before we finalize everything is the report of the House Ways and Means Committee. The House Ways and Means Committee, I think, will come out either the 11th or the 18th. It's usually one of those two Wednesdays. We take their numbers, we plug them in on the local aid and assessment categories. We finalize the numbers. Alan and I working on the budget at that point, make some final adjustments. If the numbers come in higher, we won't take as much money out of the fiscal stability fund. If it comes in lower, we have to take a little more money out of the fiscal stability fund. And then we go to print. Now, I'm hoping it comes out on the 11th because town meeting starts on the 23rd. So then we'll be meeting the half hour, before each town meeting. Now, we will be meeting probably the second week in June for one finance committee meeting at which we will do reserve fund transfers and transfers between departments that the manager presents. So we do that as late as we can. So it'll probably be the second week in June, depending upon when the manager has all the numbers put together for us to approve. So that's our schedule for the rest of this year. The more we take advantage of any spare time that we have, the fewer meetings we can have. So on that. Does anybody have any questions on the calendar? So definitely no meetings April 2nd and April 4th, that first week. The rest of it, I think we'll probably get by without any meetings, but hold them open. Okay.
Al,
Yeah,
you were
John?
saying maybe not a meeting on the 28th of February?
I don't think there will be a meeting, but that's not a definite yet. It depends on how fast, the budgets come in. So if next Wednesday, we knock off the tree committee, well, if we start at 7:30, we can just start on budgets and move through those. It sounds like we have several that are ready to be done. And, we can move through that. Okay, any other questions? Okay, budgets. David?
Okay, it's our own budget, the Finance Committee.
Okay.
And it starts at page 20 and 21.
Okay, everybody get their budgets out. Does everybody have their budgets, by the way? Okay. Finance Committee. So it's on page 19,
19, but the information is 20 and 21. Okay, as you see, there's no change since last year. The total figure is $10,300 for 2019. So without further ado, I'll make a motion that we accept that figure at $10,300.
Second.
4,300. Let me just think for a second. 18, this is that year it's split. I'm not sure. Okay, she's up to. Okay, David, sorry to do this, but I think one of the numbers needs to get changed.
Okay.
So if I could talk to you about that after the meeting, and then, bring it back.
Bring it back.
Yeah,
All right.
okay. Okay. Don't worry, I'm not cutting any of your salaries out. Okay, Derek, you wanted to do a budget, police or fire?
Yeah, I can do either or both.
Well,
Both
why
of
don't
them are equally.
Start with the first.
So police starts on 123. So in terms of fiscal 18, they're looking good. They have one potential patrol officer retiring. They could absorb the buyout. OT is on target as of now. They do have 5 vacancies, which would help offset any potential deficit. But from a budget perspective, the fiscal 19 budget is coming in at a whopping $286 under fiscal 18. So actually our meeting, I think, lasted for about 15 minutes. There was really not much to talk about.
So my question is, if there are 5 vacancies, why are they that close to the 3.5%? What are they spending their money on? Because when they fill the vacancies, they won't have the money, or do they have the money set aside?
They won't fill all the vacancies. They have 2 candidates for the 5. Apparently, one of the challenges they're having is with the new cannabis law, that apparently when some of the potential recruits hear that there would be drug testing, they suddenly lose interest.
Usually that money gets eaten up a lot in overtime.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see for fiscal 17, is substantially 780. So if they don't have them, they still got to put the bodies on the street. So you usually bump up the overtime.
Okay.
Okay, so any other significant changes?
Okay, so I move approval of the bottom line number of $8,214,590.
Why don't you say all 3 numbers? So the appropriations, 8,214,590, minus the parking offsets of 57,624, for a bottom line of
Okay.
8,156,966. That way, all 3 numbers are a part of our vote.
Okay, so I move the appropriation total of $8,214,590 less parking offset of $57,624 for a bottom line total of $8,156,966. I move approval of that number.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Okay, any questions?
What's the otherwise unclassified that went up 212%, although it's not really that much money? What are they putting in there?
Carolyn, could you speak up just a little bit,
Oh,
please?
okay. If you look at the second page of their budget, the second from the bottom, otherwise unclassified went up 212%. It's not that huge an amount of cash, but
We didn't ask that.
And 17,
make it more realistic.
I can.
Yeah, it does look more realistic.
a lot of times.
Yeah, it
They
just
do
looks
that.
more realistic, I think is
Keep
all
in
it
mind,
is.
by the way, that the reason these budgets, you'll see almost all the budgets fairly level funded is because they've run through the end of their contract. So all of the salary increases for next year will be in that warrant article collective bargain. So last year, they'd all go up 2%, 3%, whatever, because the salary increases are most of that. So the only salary increases in these should be probably step increases.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, any other questions?
So that means, wait, so their reclass budget will be really high this year, you think? Because Karen and I just started sending emails today. We haven't actually looked at it yet.
No, I don't think
Yeah.
the reclassification should be any, it's not the reclassifications that'll have the money, it'll be in the collective bargaining article.
Oh, which is an article, a warrant
Right.
article, okay.
Yeah. So I noticed you had a big drop in gas and oil. Are the new cars more efficient?
But then there's an increase in energy expenses. And with all that renovation, do we really need to
Well,
be
that could be.
spending more on energy?
One of the things, if you can hear me,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
yes,
One of the things you see throughout the expense budgets is they did some study to see where they were really spending the money, and they juggled numbers around in order to more accurately
okay.
reflect where they're spending the money. And as you can see on the gas and oil, from the 16 and 17 actuals,
Yes.
that really was a lot less than the budget for 18, so they reduced the amount for the 19 budget to more accurately reflect what they're spending.
From on high. Okay, any other questions? Okay, motion has been made. I'll just read the bottom line. Police the taxation, $8,156,966. With that includes the parking fund offset. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, favorable action, unanimous. On 214. Okay, fire?
Fire is a similar situation where the bottom line total is essentially the same. They have moved some money around in various accounts. For fiscal 18, they're also looking at their they'll be good the rest of the year as things stand now. Fiscal 19, they potentially could have some retirement buyout, so it could be a hit then. They do have. I wrote down. They do have. Paul, do you remember how many vacancies Bobby had?
I'll tell you on the page.
I'm looking it up here.
Oh, there it is, 2. So he's short 2 firefighters, but he's going to wait until next year to ask for a list. He asked for one now. He's not going to get it until next year anyway, next fiscal year.
So, a question for both police and fire. Do they anticipate any reserve fund requests this year?
As things stand now, no.
Okay, for both.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Next year, they could have a couple $100,000 of buyouts. So next year could be a little. Within the budget, again, there isn't a whole lot of activity going on. So unless anybody has any questions, move the fiscal 19 budget, the appropriation total of $7,467,629, less $200,121, offsets for a total of $7,267,508. So we approve of that number.
Okay, is that your recommendation?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. For the new people, that those offsets, I believe, come from the ambulance
Yes.
revolving fund?
Yeah, one note about those offsets is they're now including some of the EMT supplies and expenses, line item 5262. They're including those in the offset, which is why the offset took as big a jump as it did this year.
Okay. Okay, any questions? Okay, motion's been made and seconded for the three numbers ending with 7,267,508. Are there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous. Favorable action. 214. Okay, do you want to keep going? You have a,
So the last one then is inspections, which is starts on page 137. This is even less of an interesting budget than the other two. And we got Mike Burns the day after the special town meeting, so he was feeling, I guess he was feeling pretty beat up. In between tales of woe, we did get into some budget stuff. He has no real personnel issues at this point. So again, unless anybody has any questions, I'll just move the approval of fiscal 19 budget of $495,994.
do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Questions? I have one. Do you have the revenues, inspection revenues for last fiscal year and projected to this year?
I do. It was a little confusing, so Paul, please feel free to step in. So fiscal 17, they have $1,357,000, and apparently there were some permits that should have gotten scanned at the end of fiscal 17 that didn't get done because somebody was out until early fiscal 18. So the fiscal 18 projection is 1.7. And then he's estimating.
1,700,000?
Sorry?
1.7 thousand?
1.7 million.
Million.
And then for fiscal 19, he's estimating it could be as much as 2 million.
Okay, and that money goes into the general fund, correct? Okay, so for fiscal 17, 1,357,000, projected for 18, 1,007,000, and projected for 19 as much as 2 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, any questions? Peter?
What about the vacancies in this department? Is he-
I don't believe he had any.
Two.
It says
Yeah,
there
good.
too in the budget.
Paul, do you remember what he was doing about vacancies?
He's filled the one vacancy, which was the new position that they got this year. He filled that, but he couldn't fill it until about January. And he's very happy with the new full-time person that's listed. That would be the full-time vacancy is the second of the two vacancies on the chart. The first vacancy, he's been paying someone through a contract basis, and they're about to put that out to actually fill it. He said he actually had a conversation with Karen just last week. And he knows at least one candidate for that will be coming in, and that's the 0.4 person part-time vacancy.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so the motion has been made and seconded for 495,994. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
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 That I changed the word. Okay. Opposed? Okay, so favorable action. Unanimous. 214. Is that, I think that's it for you?
Yes, I'm done for the year. I'll see you guys next year.
Okay, is there any others? Okay, Peter and David, you next week going to be able to maybe get a few? You like the clerk, you said.
Well, that, the little one, the finance one, clerks.
Yeah, let me just talk to you for a minute afterwards on that. Okay, are there any other budgets? Okay, are there any other discussions? Any new business? Okay, so we will not be meeting Monday, Washington's birthday. We'll meet a week from today here. We'll have that one hearing and then we'll crank on budget. So please, get as many as you can. Really appreciate it. If there's no further business, meeting is adjourned.